The monsoon winds swept across the Gulf of Siam, stirring waves and stirring fates. It was 1771, and in the heart of mainland Southeast Asia, kingdoms teetered on the edge of collapse and rebirth. In Cambodia, once proud and resplendent under Angkor's glory, the throne was now a prize contested not only by rival royal claimants, but by foreign swords. In the west, a rising force was taking shape. A fierce warrior general named Taksin had seized power in the ashes of old Ayutthaya, vowing to restore Siam's greatness. In the east, the Vietnamese court watched nervously as chaos brewed across its southwestern frontier. And in between them stood Cambodia, fractured, vulnerable, and on the brink of becoming a battleground once more. This is the story of an invasion few remember, but which changed the shape of Cambodian sovereignty in the 18th century. It's a tale of conquest, betrayal, and resistance. A tale where armies marched not just to defeat enemies, but to enthrone puppets, extract tribute, and redraw the future of Southeast Asia. This is part 1 of our series, Blood in the Mekong, Taksin's Cambodian Campaign. Part 1, The Rise from Ashes. By the early 1770s, Southeast Asia had entered a period of profound instability. The once mighty Ayutthaya kingdom had collapsed in 1767, when Burmese forces razed the capital to the ground. The royal city burned, its temples desecrated, and its people scattered. Amid the ruins, a leader emerged from the eastern provinces, an ethnic Chinese Siamese military commander named Taksin, with unmatched charisma, military cunning, and ruthless ambition. Taksin rebuilt a new Siamese power center from Thonburi, near the mouth of the Chao Phraya River. Within just a few years, he had crushed regional rivals and restored Siamese control over much of central and southern Thailand. But Taksin's ambition did not end with Siam's borders. He looked eastward to Cambodia. Cambodia, by contrast, was in disarray. Following centuries of internal decline and external aggression, its monarchy had become a revolving door of royal factions, many backed by either Siam or Vietnam. The Nguyen lords of southern Vietnam had wielded influence in Cambodia since the late 17th century, often installing their favored candidates on the Khmer throne in exchange for political allegiance and trade concessions. Cambodian kings who resisted often found themselves exiled or dead. By 1770, the reigning Cambodian king, Ang Nan II, was viewed as pro-Vietnamese. His court was seen as a vassal of the Nguyen lords, and Vietnamese military garrisons had been stationed across eastern Cambodia to secure this loyalty. But the presence of foreign troops and Ang Nan's perceived submission stirred resentment among segments of the Khmer nobility, especially in the western provinces near Battambang and Pursat, where Siamese influence had long simmered. Taksin saw an opportunity. He believed Cambodia was ripe for intervention. Officially, his court framed their involvement as supporting legitimate Khmer princes who had been driven out by Vietnamese-backed forces. But the real aim was strategic: to drive out Vietnamese troops from Cambodian soil, assert Siamese dominance over Phnom Penh, and re-establish the ancient tributary relationship Cambodia had once held with Ayutthaya. If a puppet king could be enthroned in the capital, loyal to Thonburi, then Siam would have a buffer state and a source of manpower, resources, and regional prestige. In late 1771, General Taksin gave the order. Troops were assembled in Chanthaburi and other frontier provinces, drawn from loyal Siamese units and Mon refugees who had fled Burmese conquest. The campaign was swift and brutal. The Siamese army crossed into Cambodian territory through Pursat, encountering little resistance at first. Many local officials either fled or offered tribute in hopes of avoiding devastation. The Thai chronicles speak of a grand military procession marching under the banners of Thonburi, while the Khmer chronicles fragmentary and often subdued mention the devastation with bitterness and grief. As the Siamese forces advanced, Khmer factions aligned with Siam joined their ranks. Among them was the Prince Ang Sangwon, a rival claimant to the throne who had once lived in Siamese exile. Taksin positioned Ang Sangwon as the legitimate ruler of Cambodia, promising to enthrone him once the Vietnamese-backed King Ang Nan was ousted. But Ang Senguan's claim was not widely recognized, and many Khmer nobles viewed him as a tool of foreign ambitions. Nevertheless, in early 1772, the Siamese army reached Odong and then Phnom Penh. Vietnamese troops had retreated in disarray, having been recalled to the east due to internal instability in the Nguyen realm. Nguyen Phuoc Thuan, the ruling lord of southern Vietnam, faced rebellions and famine in Cochin China, leaving his garrisons in Cambodia undersupplied and demoralized. The Siamese took advantage of this moment of weakness. Phnom Penh fell without a major siege. King Ang Nan fled toward the east, seeking Vietnamese protection. Taksin wasted no time. He installed Ang Senguan on the throne, declaring him king of Cambodia. Khmer royal regalia were transported from Odong to Phnom Penh in a carefully orchestrated ceremony where Siamese generals stood alongside Khmer nobles. The coronation was symbolic, intended to send a message across the region. Siam, not Vietnam, was now the master of Cambodia, but the occupation was far from peaceful. The Siamese army stationed troops across key towns, and looting was reported in many areas. Khmer civilians, especially in provinces seen as loyal to Ang Nan, were subject to heavy taxation, forced labor, and military conscription. Though Taksin had proclaimed his campaign as one of liberation, many Khmer people viewed it as just another invasion. Temples were plundered, granaries emptied, and Buddhist relics sent back to Siam. Some accounts suggest that Siamese officers took noblewomen as concubines and demanded tribute from local lords in silver and rice. The trauma of foreign occupation deepened. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, the Nguyen court was preparing a response. Despite their own internal crises, the Nguyen lords understood the strategic danger of allowing Siam to dominate Cambodia. Not only would it cut Vietnam off from important trade routes through the Mekong, but it would also embolden anti-Nguyen forces along the southern frontier. In late 1772, a small Vietnamese naval force set sail from Saigon, aiming to probe the southern Cambodian coast and assess the Siamese garrison's strength. The following months would mark the beginning of a bitter back-and-forth struggle. Guerrilla resistance emerged across central Cambodia, led by nobles still loyal to Ang Nan or embittered by Siamese abuses. Skirmishes erupted in Kampong Chenang, Takeo, and Pre Vinh. Siamese troops, unfamiliar with the flooded lowlands and deep forests, suffered from disease and ambushes. Supplies were stretched thin, and morale began to falter. Taksin, hearing reports of resistance and potential Vietnamese counterattacks, ordered reinforcements from Thonburi. He also dispatched emissaries to the Lao courts and to northern Khmer provinces, demanding recognition of Siamese suzerainty and warning against siding with Vietnam. But his overreach was beginning to show. Though militarily successful in the initial invasion, Siam now found itself occupying a land seething with resentment, facing both internal rebellion and external pressure. In Phnom Penh, King Ang Senguan sat uneasily on his throne. He issued decrees promising reforms, religious tolerance, and lighter taxes, but few believed his words carried weight. Most saw him as a puppet, his court filled with Siamese advisors, his guards speaking Thai instead of Khmer. Traditional ceremonies were altered, and royal titles modified in the style of Thonburi's court. Too many Cambodians, their monarchy had been hijacked. By mid-1773, signs of a turning tide were emerging. Vietnamese agents had infiltrated the lower Mekong, rallying disaffected Khmer leaders. Letters from Ang Nan too, now in Vietnamese refuge, were circulated, calling on the people to rise against the foreign usurper. Anti-Siamese sentiment grew, not only among nobles but among commoners who had suffered through looting and conscription. The stage was set for the next act of the conflict, a counteroffensive that would test both Taksin's power and Cambodia's will to survive. As Part 1 closes, Cambodia stands torn between two external giants, its throne, occupied by a king not chosen by the people, its fields trodden by foreign soldiers, its temples silent in the shadow of war. But resistance is growing, and the Mekong is far from quiet. Part 2 will follow the unfolding rebellion, Vietnam's military response, and the bloody battles that would decide Cambodia's fate. Part 2, the fall of Odong. The smoke had not yet cleared over Long Vec when Taksin's ambitions grew bolder. What had started as a campaign to test Siam's restored might soon become a full-blown attempt to seize the Khmer heartland. Cambodia, battered by decades of foreign manipulation and internal instability, now stood in the crosshairs of a military genius turned monarch. The new capital, Odong, founded in the early 17th century as a symbol of Khmer resilience, was now under imminent threat. But this time, the danger did not come from the Vietnamese, nor from internal revolt. It came from the West, and it wore the face of Taksin the Great. By 1772, the Siamese army had already established outposts inside Cambodia's western provinces. Battambang and Pursat had fallen under their control, while Kompong Shnang and even parts of Kompong Spew were reporting the presence of Thai troops. These were not mere patrols, they were garrisons spearheaded by Siamese generals loyal to Taksin and supported by Khmer collaborators, who saw a future in serving Siam. Taksin's ultimate goal was clear: to install a puppet king who would bind Cambodia to Siam's yoke. The campaign was not just territorial, it was dynastic. Cambodia's royal bloodline was at stake. King Angton, the reigning monarch of Cambodia, had been left politically isolated. His previous protector, the Vietnamese Nguyen lords, were now embroiled in a civil war of their own. The Tay Sn rebellion had erupted in 1771, fracturing Vietnamese power. For the first time in decades, Cambodia had no reliable external patron. Taksin seized upon this window of opportunity. He sent envoys to former Cambodian princes who had been exiled or sidelined, promising them the throne in exchange for loyalty to Siam. One of them, Prince Inorauti Richia, took the bait. Backed by Siamese arms and dreams of reclaiming power, he joined the invasion. The Khmer countryside burned again. Siamese troops marched toward Odong under banners of restoration, but their actions betrayed conquest. Villages along the route were forced to offer supplies or face torching. Temples were raided under the pretext of rooting out Vietnamese loyalists. Buddhist monks were harassed or coerced into blessing the campaign, while Khmer nobility who refused to cooperate were labeled traitors and executed. Resistance was sporadic and largely uncoordinated. Local militias fought with outdated weapons and lacked centralized command. The chaos played into Taksin's strategy perfectly. Inside Odong, panic began to set in. The royal court, caught between paralyzing fear and fractious rivalries, could not decide whether to stand and defend or flee and regroup. King Angton, aging and politically wounded, held onto the throne but not the reins of power. His ministers debated seeking help from the Tay Sn rebels, ironic, considering they themselves were fighting the Nguyen lords who once supported Cambodia. Others proposed negotiating directly with Siam, but Taksin was not interested in negotiation. He was interested in domination. Every message sent to Bangkok was returned with demands for unconditional submission. In early 1773, the siege of Odong began. Siamese forces, led by General Chow Phraya, Chakri Taksin's most trusted military commander, encircled the capital. Odong, though fortified by walls and perched on a hill, was poorly defended. Its cannons were rusting, its soldiers half-trained and demoralized. Supply lines had already been severed by Siamese cavalry. Hunger and disease began to spread within the city walls. Thousands of refugees who had fled from the countryside now found themselves trapped in a tightening noose. The final assault came under cover of night. Siamese troops breached the outer gates after just a few hours of concentrated bombardment. Inside, defenders fought street to street, but resistance collapsed by dawn. Khmer generals either fled or surrendered. King Angton disappeared. Some say he was spirited away to safety by loyalists, others that he died in the palace as Siamese soldiers ransacked it. His fate remains a mystery. Prince In was crowned as the new ruler under Siamese protection. The Thai chronicles refer to him as Richia III, but many Khmers refused to acknowledge his rule. They knew who had placed him on the throne, and they knew what it meant. Cambodia was now a satellite state. The court at Odong was renamed, its officials reshuffled. Khmer ministers who cooperated with the Siamese were rewarded with titles and land. Others were exiled or executed. The Khmer royal treasury was seized and transported back to Siam. Among the stolen artifacts were gold statues of the Buddha, jeweled royal regalia, and sacred palm leaf manuscripts, symbols not just of wealth, but of sovereignty. But Taksin was not finished. He ordered General Taksin to press further east. The goal now was to consolidate control along the Mekong, to sever any remaining ties between Cambodia and Vietnam, and to destroy any loyalist holdouts. Cities like Pre, Vinh, Kompong, Cam, and Kreti were targeted. This time, resistance was fiercer. Loyalist Khmer generals, many of them young nobles from the interior provinces, began to organize guerrilla campaigns. They ambushed Siamese supply lines, poisoned wells, and used the terrain to their advantage. For the first time, Siamese troops began to suffer heavy casualties. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Monks offered sanctuary to resistance fighters. Peasants rose in spontaneous revolts, and even members of Prince In's court began to defect. Stories spread of Siamese soldiers burning monasteries and violating sacred relics, whether true or embellished. They inflamed the Khmer population. What began as a campaign of conquest was now turning into a quagmire. Taksin, who had hoped to control Cambodia swiftly, now faced the threat of prolonged insurgency. By mid-1773, Siamese forces began to withdraw from the deeper provinces, consolidating their hold only around Odong Longvek and areas closer to the Thai border. The rest of Cambodia slipped from their grasp. Prince In's court became a symbol of betrayal, not legitimacy. Khmer insurgents, now backed loosely by remnants of the Nugent faction and Taesan rebels, began calling for the return of true Khmer sovereignty. They invoked the ancient legacy of Jayavarman, of Angkor, and of divine kingship, not one imposed by outsiders, but chosen by the gods and the people. Taksin, increasingly distracted by rebellions in northern Siam and growing dissent among his own generals, could not commit more troops to Cambodia. What was supposed to be a triumphant conquest now threatened to become an unmanageable occupation. His military genius had restored Siam's pride, but in Cambodia it had only deepened scars. Cambodia, though broken and looted, did not die. Its people, torn between Vietnamese manipulation and Siamese aggression, held on to what they could: memory, resistance, and belief. The fall of Odong was not the end. It was a warning. The kingdoms of the region could be invaded, puppets could be crowned, temples could be desecrated, but Khmer identity would endure. In the jungles of Kompong Tom, in the rice fields of Takeo, in the shadow of Angkor, a silent defiance began to stir once more. Part 3. The Phantom Crown. The dust had barely settled in the ruins of Odong, but the true battle was just beginning. Not a battle of armies now, but of shadows, of fractured loyalties and shifting power, where the Cambodian throne became a mirage sought by many, but grasped by none. What remained was not a kingdom, but a haunted palace, and what followed was not peace, but the long, silent war for a phantom crown. After Siamese forces led by General Taksin swept through Cambodia and temporarily seized Odong in 1772, they installed a pro-Siamese ruler, Prince Ang Nan. He was young, charismatic, and pliable. To Taksin, he seemed the perfect candidate to legitimize Siam's dominance over Cambodia, Khmer by blood, but Siamese in loyalty. But Ang Nan's crown was a fragile one, resting atop the ambitions of a dozen generals and the scars of a broken nation. Back in Thonburi, Taksin had declared his success. The mission was, in theory, complete. Cambodia had been liberated from Vietnamese control, and a Siam-friendly regime had been erected in its place. But the truth on the ground was far more unstable. Ang Non's regime controlled little beyond the smoke-charred remnants of Odong and some river valleys. Much of the countryside remained fiercely loyal to the memory of King Auti, too deposed and exiled, but not forgotten. The Vietnamese, meanwhile, were far from idle. Though weakened after internal rebellions and the Tsen uprising, the Nugent lords still viewed Cambodia as their rightful protectorate. From Saigon, envoys and covert operatives began to slip across the Mekong once more, sowing dissent among nobles, promising weapons and aid to rebel factions. Cambodia became a chessboard where every nobleman was a potential traitor, every monk a possible informant, and every village a battlefield. Ang Nan, aware of the danger, began cracking down on dissent with brutal efficiency. Former ministers loyal to the previous court were arrested, some executed. Buddhist temples suspected of harboring rebels were desecrated in raids. Rather than unify Cambodia, his reign widened the fissures. His closeness to the Siamese, whom many still saw as invaders, made him appear a puppet. And though his throne bore the mark of royalty, it carried no divine legitimacy in the eyes of the people. Taksin, now king of Siam, was facing his own troubles. The cost of maintaining garrisons in Cambodia was immense. Supplies had to be ferried upriver across hostile terrain. Soldiers grew sick from disease, and the Khmer countryside ravaged by famine and war for little in return. The dream of holding Cambodia seemed to yield little benefit and mounting resentment. In 1773, sensing this growing strain, Vietnamese loyalist groups launched coordinated uprisings across eastern Cambodia. Forts manned by Siamese troops were attacked. Ang Non's patrols were ambushed in the jungle. And in one particularly brutal incident, a pro-Siamese provincial governor was captured, flayed alive, and hung from a Bodhi tree in Kompong Kam, his blood, a message that the war was far from over. Taksin responded with fury. Another campaign was launched, this time led by the fearsome General Taksin. Later, Rama, the first thousands of reinforcements marched east, burning villages suspected of aiding the Vietnamese. The Mekong ran red again, and fire swept through the heart of Cambodia. But for all the fury of this renewed campaign, the outcome was the same. Resistance merely scattered into smaller, more elusive bands. Amid the chaos, another ghost returned to the stage, Prince Ang Sengguan, a rival claimant to the throne who had long been hidden in Vietnamese territory. Now backed by Tsen arms, he crossed the border with a small but determined army. He was hailed as a savior in some quarters, particularly in the east, where Siamese atrocities had turned sentiment violently anti-Siamese. The country was once again split in two. Ang Nan in the west, upheld by Siamese bayonets. Ang Skawan in the east, carried by Vietnamese promises, but neither held the people's full loyalty. By now, the Cambodian monarchy had become a shattered relic, its spiritual aura tainted by foreign manipulation. The throne had not merely lost its king, it had lost its meaning. Even within Ang Non's court, divisions festered. Some of his ministers, fearing Siam's collapse under mounting wars with Burma, urged a pivot back to Vietnam. Others proposed full independence, abandoning both suzerains and rebuilding Cambodia from within. But it was too late for neutrality. Cambodia was no longer treated as a kingdom, but a battleground. It had no Alizoni overlords. In late 1773, with Siam distracted by Burmese offensives in the north, Ang Sengguan launched a bold assault on Odong. Though outnumbered, his forces were fast, and morale was high. The attack came at dawn, smoke and cannon fire shrouding the ancient capital once more. Siamese troops fought bitterly, but their supply lines were stretched, and reinforcements could not arrive in time. Odong fell. Again, Ang Nan fled toward Battambang, seeking refuge among loyal nobles. For a time, he tried to regroup, but his support dwindled. By 1775, he was captured and executed, some say by rebels, others claimed by Vietnamese assassins. His head was never found. His crown passed into myth. Ang Nguyen, now enthroned in Phnom Penh, restored Cambodia to the Vietnamese orbit. But the throne was hollow. The palace had been looted, the royal regalia scattered. Hundreds of monks had fled. Entire provinces were depopulated. The rivers, once teeming with trade, now bore only the drifting corpses of war. Cambodia was sovereign in name, but spiritually lost. Its throne had become a symbol of suffering rather than kingship. In Thanburi, Taksin received the news with rage and denial. Some accounts claim he flew into a fit, ordering the execution of officers who failed to hold Odin. Others suggest he fell into a deep melancholy. Cambodia had been his imperial dreamer gem to place atop Siam's crown, but now it had slipped through his fingers, as elusive as smoke. But Taksin's ambitions did not die. In 1775, as the flames of rebellion began to reach Siam's own borders, he launched yet another expedition east. But this time, the army returned, not with a king, but with slaves. Thousands of Cambodians were marched west into captivity. Nobles, scholars, peasants, and monks. The aim was not conquest, but erasure. If Siam could not rule Cambodia, it would take Cambodia's soul. By the time Taksin's reign ended in madness and blood, executed in 1782 by the very generals he once trusted, Cambodia was a shadow of itself. Its monarchy, once divine, had become a toy in foreign hands. Its kings were no longer anointed by the gods, but chosen by foreigners. The crown had become phantom, and the kingdom haunted. And yet, in this darkness, Cambodia endured. In silent villages and broken pagodas, the spirit of the nation persisted. Peasants sang old court songs, monks restored broken stupas, the river still flowed. The throne had vanished, but not the people. And someday, from the ashes, Cambodia would rise again. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.